The screen of my phone shook in my grip. My father's words lingered in the silence between us. Jennifer is bringing her boyfriend home for your mother's birthday. He's someone significant. He speaks eloquently. He carries himself with poise. A purposeful pause. And your job? Well, discussing it isn't very easy. It's probably best if you don't come. My throat tightened as if unseen hands were squeezing it. The sleek Seattle skyline visible from my office window, a view I had earned through years of hard work, suddenly felt like a taunt. I clutched the edge of my desk until my knuckles turned white, the contrast glaring against the polished mahogany surface my assistant had insisted was fitting for a company co-founder. What are you implying? My voice came out lower than I meant, a calmness that felt dangerous and unfamiliar. Coming home would only humiliate the entire family, he went on, his tone growing flatter with each word. If you still plan on coming, don't refer to me as your father. The call ended with a soft click that somehow resonated louder than any slam could. At that moment, a transaction notification from my banking app lit up my screen. The automatic monthly payment of $39,768 from my parents' utilities had just gone through. Transfer complete. Just like the previous 23 months, just like the $9,842.17 total I had paid without a single acknowledgement. My name is Olivia. I'm 30 years old and the quiet co-founder of a sustainable energy technology firm called Pacific TerryTech. This is the tale of how I finally made my family recognize me. I had always thought family was everything. Growing up in our small town near Seattle, I became skilled at blending into the background, stepping aside in family photos, quietly managing bills while my sister Jennifer reveled in the glow of parental affection. In our household, she was the star. Her graduations, promotions, and even breakups turned into family celebrations. In the meantime, I established a multi-million-dollar business that my parents still referred to as Olivia tinkering with computers somewhere in the tech world. The sting of their dismissal had become so routine that I had stopped recognizing it as pain until this moment. For 2 years, I had been quietly covering my parents' electricity, water, and internet bills. It all began with a heartfelt call from my mother about increasing expenses and inadequate retirement funds. If you could assist us even a little, it would mean so much, she had said, her voice softening into that familiar tone that always came before a request. I agreed, thinking it would be a short-term arrangement, but what was meant to be temporary turned into a permanent obligation. Whenever I inquired if Jennifer was contributing, my mother's evasions followed a predictable pattern. Your sister will help out next time, or she's taking care of your father's medical bills. I knew none of it was true, yet I smiled and kept sending money, nearly $400 each month without complaint or acknowledgement. As I gazed at my banking app, watching the transaction history scroll by, something solidified within me. Not grief or anger, just a chilling certainty. I had spent years being invisible, convinced that my quiet dependability would eventually lead to recognition. Instead, it had resulted in my exclusion from my mother's birthday celebration because I didn't conform to their ideal of a successful daughter. My fingers moved purposefully across the screen, navigating to the automatic payment section. One by one, I selected each utility payment, power, water, internet, and canceled them. Not out of spite, but for self-preservation. The one thing they hadn't yet stripped from me was my self-respect. As I pressed the final confirmation button, my hand trembled. Not from uncertainty, but from the frightening realization that I was finally prioritizing myself after 3 decades of prioritizing them. A week later, my mother texted, "Just received a notice that the internet bill is due. Can you handle it?" No mention of my father's words, no apology, just another request. I read the message, set my phone aside, and went back to analyzing the quarterly projections for our company's new solar project. My silence wasn't a declaration, it was merely all I had left to offer. That night, I found myself dreaming of my childhood home. Yet in the dream, I couldn't locate my bedroom, as if even in my dreams, I had no place there. 2 weeks went by. My father called and left a voicemail. The power company reached out, stating that this month's bill was unpaid. What was happening? No concern, no mention of our previous conversation. I listened once, then turned my phone face down on my desk. My mother's birthday came exactly 3 weeks after my father had told me not to return home. I envisioned the scene, her favorite roasted chicken, cake from her beloved bakery, relatives gathered around the dining table. Everyone except for me. The same dining table where I had spent 25 years receiving scraps of attention while Jennifer basked in praise and inquiries about her upcoming marriage, while I endured sidelong glances and whispers questioning why I was still single despite my intelligence. At exactly 4 p.m., my phone lit up with my mother's name. I watched it ring until it stopped. Next, my father called, followed by Jennifer. 3 calls in under 10 minutes. I let them all go, feeling nothing but a hollow calm as I stared out at the approaching storm clouds. 10 minutes later, the messages started coming in from Mom. Olivia, the power has been shut off. The whole house is dark. Please pay the bill from Dad. No water. We can't cook. Handle it now. From Jennifer. The internet's down. Guests are arriving. Please fix this urgently. I glanced at the clock. 5:12 p.m. exactly 3 weeks since I had cancelled the automatic payments. 3 weeks since my father had told me not to call him Dad anymore. And now, in the midst of the celebration, I had been deemed too embarrassing to attend, and everything was shutting down. Power, water, internet, each disappearing precisely when it was needed the most. I didn't reply. There was nothing to clarify. I sat there, turning my coffee cup in my hands, observing the raindrops as they carved jagged trails down my window. In that instant, it dawned on me that they weren't reaching out because they missed me. They were reaching out because there was no one else left to bear their burdens. By 6 p.m., my phone was buzzing nonstop with messages from my extended family. You embarrassed your mother in front of everyone. Your sister was right. People like you shouldn't show up on a joyful occasion. I read each message without replying, not because I agreed in silence, but because I was weary of justifying myself to those who always favored the louder voice over the softer truth. The screen lit up once more. Aunt Lauren, the only family member who still made an effort to look me in the eyes when it truly mattered. She was calling through an old video app that only she and I still used. I picked up on the second ring. Her face came into view, partially shadowed by the warm yellow light of her kitchen behind her. A kitchen I knew well. Every cracked tile, every squeaky cabinet door. But tonight, it felt different, filled with awkward laughter and strained conversations. You're not going to pay for it, Olivia. Her voice was soft, more probing than accusatory. I locked eyes with her through the screen. You know, Auntie, it was Dad who told me not to come. He said if I insisted on showing up, I shouldn't refer to him as my father anymore. She went quiet. Behind her, the room erupted into chaos. My mother's voice pierced through. Tell her I'm ashamed of her. On this day of all days, how could she do this? My father, sharp and impatient. It's not that serious. It's just a matter of paying a few bills. What kind of daughter gets petty over money? An uncle chimed in. Poor Jennifer having to deal with a sister like that. Footsteps drew near. Jennifer appeared behind Aunt Lauren, arms crossed, her lips twisted in annoyance. She even picked up the call. Mom's been crying all day. Does she even care? Honestly, there's no shame whatsoever. I stayed quiet, observing this scene unfold like a play I had witnessed far too often. Just as I was about to hang up, another face emerged at the edge of the screen. A young man with impeccably styled hair and a dark suit. He glanced at me, then did a double take, his face shifting from bewilderment to recognition. Hey, boss, he said, his voice wavering slightly as if unsure whether those words were appropriate in this situation. I froze, instinctively tightening my grip on the phone. I hadn't anticipated this clash of worlds, especially not on the night I was considered too shameful to join a family gathering. I studied him for a moment before everything fell into place. Naturally, he was Hudson Ka, one of the new senior engineers from our southern branch who had moved to Seattle headquarters just 3 months ago. We had exchanged emails regarding the renewable battery project. He had sent me comprehensive reports, but I had no clue he was Jennifer's boyfriend, the one everyone was eager to impress. The room behind Aunt Lauren fell silent. I noticed her glance over her shoulder as whispers began to ripple through the kitchen. Wait, what did he just call Olivia? Boss? Does that imply Olivia is Jennifer's boyfriend superior? The murmurs intensified, overlapping in confusion. I remained motionless, neither confirming nor denying, simply waiting for the moment to unfold. The young man straightened up, looked beyond the camera to the others in the room, and spoke clearly. In case you weren't aware, I work at Pacific Tech. MS, Olivia is one of the co-founders of the company. His declaration sliced through the noise of dishes and whispers, plunging the room into stunned silence. I pressed my lips together, giving a slight nod of affirmation. He returned his gaze to the screen, his eyes wide with anxiety. Hope your big introduction goes flawlessly, I said calmly, then ended the call. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in years. Not out of satisfaction, but because the burden of invisibility had finally been lifted. They perceived me not as their ideal version of me, but as I truly was. Even with my eyes shut, their faces remained vivid in my mind. I could recall the precise moment when their carefully crafted story about my identity crumbled entirely. The following morning, before the sunlight had completely seeped through my blinds, I checked my emails as I typically did. Among the usual meeting reminders and accounting notes was a name that didn't ring a bell. Hudson Kane. I opened the email. I apologize. I wasn't aware you were Jennifer's sister. I've always held you in high regard at the company. I raised an eyebrow, leaning back against my headboard as I continued to read. Hudson expressed his surprise at learning about our familial link. According to his message, Jennifer had portrayed me as merely a receptionist assisting with the tech company's paperwork, neglecting to mention my leadership position. Then, without mincing words, he stated, I didn't anticipate her to be like that. I will be terminating this relationship. Thank you for not putting me on the spot in front of everyone. I placed my phone on my chest and briefly closed my eyes. After a few moments, I reopened my inbox and crafted a composed reply. Hudson, that's your issue. I don't expect anyone to make choices just to remain in my favor. Think carefully before taking any action. And just to clarify, I don't mix family with work. I hit send. No further explanation was necessary. Some matters, once clarified, need no additional words. Around 10 a.m. While concluding a meeting with department heads, my phone buzzed. Jennifer's name lit up the screen. I declined the call, not out of resentment, but because I was weary of apologies that only surfaced after everything had unraveled. Within 5 minutes, a message came through. I'm sorry. I didn't anticipate Hudson would change like that. You're his superior. If you said something, I'm sure he'd heed your words. Please speak to him. Ask him to return to me. I walked to the hallway window, gazing out at the Seattle skyline as I formulated my response. Hudson didn't leave because I instructed him to. He departed due to your lifestyle, your treatment of others, your disdain for what you don't comprehend, and your belief that a gentle tone can manipulate anyone. After I sent it, I went back to my desk, but within a minute, another message popped up. I realize I made a mistake. This time, I truly mean it. I will change. Please trust me. Just this once. I read it, felt no emotion stir inside me, and calmly deleted the message. Not out of indifference, but because I finally grasped the truth. Sometimes, the gap between two individuals isn't about the apology itself. It's about the timing of that apology. 2 weeks later, I learned through company channels that Hudson had requested a transfer back to our southern branch. I approved it right away, without any questions. A week later, I came home from work to find my parents on my porch, each carrying a small suitcase, their faces weary from the journey. I didn't inquire why they were there. This wasn't a casual visit. I simply opened the door and welcomed them in, wanting to avoid the unavoidable conversation that neighbors might overhear. We settled in my living room, steam still wafting from the tea I had made. My father was the first to speak, apologizing in a softer tone than usual. My mother added that perhaps they had gone too far, that things should never have escalated to this point. I stayed silent, listening to see if this apology signified an end or a new beginning. As I anticipated, my father's tone began to change. "We're family, Olivia, and family supports one another. We raised you, sent you to school. Everything you have now, part of it comes from us, right?" I looked at him, my face expressionless, but my posture subtly straightening. Then my mother spoke, her voice soft as if proposing something entirely reasonable. "If you could perhaps send us about $2,000 a month, just a little assistance. It's not much for someone like you." I observed the two individuals seated in my living room, the very same ones who had left me out of a family event because they deemed me an embarrassment. Now, they were in my home, assigning a monetary figure to their apology. $2,000 each month simply because I was their daughter. Apparently, one of Jennifer's acquaintances had mentioned reading about Pacific TerraTech's recent funding round in a technology magazine. $47 million in venture capital. And just like that, I was deemed worthy of reconciliation. A soft, involuntary chuckle escaped me. It wasn't loud or derisive, but rather the kind that surfaces when someone shares a tale that defies reason. My parents looked at me with anticipation, as if they were waiting for me to nod in agreement, but I felt no anger. I had come too far for that. I leaned back in my chair, my voice calm. "What about Jennifer? How much will she contribute each month?" The room seemed to freeze, the atmosphere thickening. My father glanced at my mother, who replied cautiously, her voice lowering slightly. "Your sister's job is still uncertain, and her breakup with Hudson has affected her." I nodded softly, not surprised. The same justifications repackaged in sympathetic tones, but ultimately mere deflections. I lifted my gaze, locking eyes with them. "If she agrees to support you with $2,000 a month, I will do the same. No more, no less." They stared at me, trying to gauge my seriousness. I continued in a quiet tone. "Or if you prefer that I cover the entire amount, I will require something in writing, a legal document confirming that after both of you pass, the house will be entirely mine." I remained still after that. No pressure, no further elaboration, just waiting to see how they would react now that, for the first time, I was setting the terms for what they had always viewed as my obligation. The silence felt like a tangible weight between us, laden with 30 years of unspoken expectations. As soon as I finished speaking, a heavy quiet enveloped the room. My father abruptly stood up, slamming his hand on the hardwood table and causing tea to spill across its surface. His shout echoed throughout the room, his chest rising and falling with fury. "You're imposing conditions on your parents. We nurtured you for over 20 years, and now you want to squeeze us for every penny like this. What kind of life are you leading, huh?" He yelled so loudly that I was convinced my neighbors caught every word. Yet, I remained still, my hands resting on the armrests, my gaze unwavering, not icy, but no longer soft. I waited for him to finish before I stood up slowly. My voice came out low and composed, yet sharp enough to pierce through the turmoil he had stirred. "I think you both should leave my house." It wasn't a threat or said in anger, just a request from someone who had reached the end of what respect could tolerate. No one uttered another word, only the sound of luggage scraping against the hardwood and the door shutting behind them, quieter than all the things left unsaid. After they departed, I stood by the window, watching them walk away, and I realized that the familiar pain in my chest, the one I had carried for years, had finally started to diminish. It's been 2 years since I last saw them. I didn't block their numbers, change my email, or completely sever ties. I simply stopped reaching out and waited. Waited to see if they would still view me as family once I was no longer playing the role of their silent supporter. In those 2 years, there has been no call checking in on me, no birthday wishes, not even a simple, "How are you?" Jennifer reached out to me once, 6 months after our parents' visit, asking for a job reference. I politely turned her down. I used to think they would change, but I've come to understand that not everyone does, especially those who have never acknowledged their wrongs in the first place. And I still reside here, work, and navigate my days. The only change is that I no longer permit myself to be an emotional ATM, always ready to give and be heard in the name of obligation. I have started to cultivate connections with individuals who truly understand me, colleagues who appreciate my thoughts, friends who reach out just to see how I'm doing, and even a special someone who regards me with sincere interest instead of mere expectation. One important lesson I've come to realize is that family isn't merely a space where kindness is demanded and labeled as love. True family is where you are cherished as an individual, not as a financial resource, a backup option, or a last resort when all else fails. Before I turn the page on this chapter, I want to pose a question. Was I mistaken? Mistaken for declining the $2,000 monthly support to my aging parents who brought me up? I once held the belief that my family could resolve any issue. However, after feeling like an outsider in my own home more times than I can remember, I made the decision to rise up and break the cycle. Was I too harsh? Maybe, or perhaps I was just beginning to recognize my own worth at precisely the right moment.